Hey, welcome to the Business and Society podcast, where we explore diverse ideas about business and society with leading thinkers and practitioners. I am your host, Senthil. Today, we are talking about dark patterns, those subtle design tricks in apps and websites that push us into choices that we didn't intend, from confusing consent banners to subscription traps. Joining me is Murray Potel, founder of Fair Patterns. Murray is a leading voice on ethical, human centered design. We will unpack what dark patterns are, why they have become so widespread, and how better design can rebuild trust. Let's get into it. Murray, great to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Senthil. It's my pleasure to be here with you.
Murray, I have a teenage son. Until I come across your work, the biggest concern for me was privacy. As soon as I started following you, reading about your work, I realized dark patterns are no lesser issue. Tell us what exactly are dark patterns.
Sure, I'm also the mother of two teenagers, and yes, I worry a lot about them facing dark patterns. So, what is it? Well, very simply, it's mechanisms online that make us do things we wouldn't have done otherwise. So it's not even that it's a choice that we make online because we don't get to decide. We are tricked, we are manipulated or deceived into doing things that we really wouldn't have done otherwise. So if we take a very concrete example, let's imagine a real life situation. Let's imagine a shop. Okay, you enter the shop. Well, picture this. As soon as you've entered the shop, there's a small robot jumping on you and putting, a mic on your coat, let's say. And the mic will also be a camera and it will record everything you say and do while you're shopping inside, while you're perhaps, picking a product to look at it, there might be a little voice whispering in your ear, oh, don't you want to buy this? And then if you're putting it back on the shelves, then the little voice is saying, oh, so you don't want to look your best today? Trying to shame you into not buying. And then let's imagine that you go to the counter to pay, and actually the price changes at the very last minute. And actually, there's a machine putting more things into your basket without you noticing. And because everything happens in a flash, well, you buy things without willing to buy them. I mean, we would never go back to that shop ever again, right? Except this is what's happening every single day online. This is the online environment in which we shop, in which we purchase products without having the willingness to buy them. This is the online environment where we get trapped into subscriptions that we never wanted in the first place, that were pushed to us as a free delivery. This is a real case, right? This is also the digital world where, back to your point about privacy, we share more personal data than we would have if we had understood what's going on. Is it any clearer?
That's a beautiful example. You said one example that came to my mind is whenever I try to book a flight ticket, um, often you see that the fare is expected to go up. This is a trend, and so which basically makes you anxious, right?
So the very common dark patterns in flight booking, actually, we've made a video out of it for the OECD. Basically, dark patterns can be present at various steps of the journey. Usually it's hidden insurance that is pre-ticked sometimes, or that is pushed to you when maybe, you didn't want an insurance, but because you do everything so quickly on your mobile, you don't really see that it's been added. Another very classic dark patterns in flight booking is choose a seat for a price. Basically, you're presented 2 or 3 options, $10 or 15 or 20, depending on the type of seat. What they don't tell you is that it could be $0. Except because you can, you have the right not to choose a seat, and then it will be allocated randomly to you. Except the way the information is architectured, is pushed to you, you are led to believe that the only choice is not between 0 and 10 or 15, it's between 10, 15, and 20. And that represents, millions and dozens of millions that are overspent, while it could have been just regular seats assigned randomly. So that's really a classic.
So, are there any archetypes of dark patterns which you can talk about?
Absolutely, there are so many types. So, first of all, when you dive into the topic of dark patterns, you have to be aware of the fact that this is a topic um, researchers and academics are really passionate about. So, ever since Harry Brignall coined the term, that was back in 2012, I think, and we're lucky to work with Harry. Ever since he coined the term, hundreds of scientific articles have been written and published on the issue of dark patterns. So this is very heavily researched. There are no less than 16 different taxonomies of dark patterns. Okay, so 16 different ways of naming them, of regrouping them into categories. And some researchers, Colin Gray and Christiana Santos and Natalia Bielova, have created an ontology of dark patterns that actually regroups all of these taxonomies into an architecture that really makes sense. Basically, fighting against the idea that because the concept might appear a bit blurry, then it doesn't stand in court. Well, they've precisely evidenced the opposite. So now we have an ontology of dark patterns. Now, to be concrete, I think it's interesting to talk about very practical types of dark patterns. You can go very far in terms of academic research, but for the public at large, it's really important to, keep it really practical and concrete. So, for example, I think that all of us have come across basically tricky wording online, falsely presenting subscriptions into something that it's not. So we're talking about the free delivery, so-called free delivery, which actually was a subscription that is very much to be paid for and very difficult to cancel. So I'm talking about the Amazon Prime case, for which Amazon had to settle in the amount of $2.5 billion with the FTC last month. Okay. So this is not a theoretical case. They were presenting a free delivery. It was actually a series of traps. And now they have to give the money back to consumers that got tricked. So this is a classic example. Another very classic
Sorry,
example.
so
Yeah,
my
sure.
apologies. So, because you talked about Amazon and free delivery, we often get parcels. I'm a bit intrigued. It is free, isn't it?
Of course, and it's a very good question. So, the delivery per se is free, but only if you enroll into Prime. And Prime is a recurring subscription that is very much to be paid for. So, the honest way of presenting it is, okay, subscribe to Prime for, let's say, I don't know, $15 a month, perhaps, and you will get free deliveries every single time you order. And actually, this is commercially, this is an offer that could be interesting for people, but you have to present it in a way that is honest, that discloses the price upfront, so that people can make an informed decision. Okay, do I want to spend $15 every month? And the calculation that you make in your mind at that time before deciding is, okay, how many times do I need to purchase things online? Basically, what's the price of the delivery for, let's say, 2 or 3 or maybe 5 deliveries a month? And is the $15 price a good deal for me? That's the honest way of pushing a subscription. But that's not at all what they did. They pushed it as a free delivery, and that was it. They didn't disclose the fact that it was a subscription. They didn't disclose the price, and that's directly contrary to ROSCA, which is the US law applicable to subscriptions. And then when people, realized, usually on their bank slips, that there was a recurring amount, every single month, at first they thought, it was some sort of a scam. And then when they realized that they got tricked into a subscription, they tried to cancel it. And this is where Amazon really, really went too far, because they purposefully made the unsubscription journey extremely difficult. It took up to 7 steps to unsubscribe. And at each step, they tried to dissuade you or seduce you or frighten you. And it was so purposefully done to be difficult that internally, the teams within Amazon used to call it Iliad. Like, you have no chance of, ever unsubscribing. And because of the discovery mechanism in the US, where the FTC typically could require to be provided with internal documents, they provided emails where operational teams flagged the problem to senior management, saying that millions of people were complaining that they couldn't unsubscribe, that it was a nightmare. And there's an email, and actually several emails saying, from senior management saying, well, let's keep it this way because it's making so much money that we won't change anything. And this is why 2 senior members of management at Amazon were actually facing personal liability charges. And that's probably why they settled in the end, because it puts an end to legal proceedings. It's not exactly an admission of guilt, but we all know what's behind that, right? And I have to say that the complaint of the FTC was remarkably clear. They had all the screenshots. They really explained all the steps. And it's probably one of the most giant dark patterns that existed. And so this is now settled for the US. What's really interesting is that from the $2.5 billion settlement altogether, $1 billion is a penalty. Okay, so it's a form of fine. $1.5 billion are going to be reimbursed to US consumers that were tricked. And I think the maximum is $50 per person. But imagine that, if you're not making a lot of money, $50, right? That's a lot for everyone, actually, right? So this is the Amazon saga.
That's a big story. Oh, gosh. 2 days back, I was trying to cancel a subscription for a pet sitting platform, right? Where you can get
Mm-hmm.
house sitters who come and take care of your pet.
Yeah.
All I was trying to do is just untick that automatic renewal of subscription, okay, which is December 2026. I mean, the number of layers I have to go through to reach that point is quite significant. Now I understand the terminology for that as dark patterns. So, yeah,
Exactly. And let me guess, until when you subscribed to that pet sitting service, I guess that it was 1 or 2 clicks to subscribe.
very simple. Just your card and
Very
CV.
simple. Exactly. And so this is where, there's a huge asymmetry, because it should be as easy to unsubscribe as to subscribe, right? And so if they can make it, 1 click to get into the subscription, it should be 1 click to also put an end to the subscription. Talking about the types, this is just one example, but I think most of us will have also come across the urgency messages, which are usually fake. "Oh, only 3 left in stock," right? Or the countdown timers, like, "Oh, the offer ends in 3, 2, 1, 0," and that really exploits our cognitive biases. We all have cognitive biases. That's the beauty of being human, I guess. But it really makes us very sensitive to, for example, we have a loss aversion bias. Like, if we have the impression that we're going to lose something, if it's combined with urgency, then we can't resist it, basically. So typically, fake countdown timers, fake urgency messages, fake scarcity messages. When you book a hotel room.
Yes, I'm just thinking
Yeah,
when you're saying only 2 rooms left.
exactly. Or even better, 45 people are looking at the same room as you are. And this is completely fake. That's one. And second, even if overall the number sometimes is right, it's not even for the same dates as you are looking for. So it's completely irrelevant to you. Just so you know, there's a class action against booking in the Netherlands precisely because of that. So that is going to change in the hotel booking industry in the coming months. I'm betting on that.
Murray, I was looking at your profile. Sorry, I'm just breaking from dark patterns for a second. You had a very successful career in competitive law. Then you worked for some of the leading luxury brands in the world.
Mhm.
Where did you take this pivot from pure legal profession to just looking into an area which is very new for most of us?
Sure, sure. Well, I think I'm a problem solver at heart. My brain, the way my brain works is that it sees complex issues, and then once it's identified those legal complex issues, then it wants to solve it. And so, in a way, when I came across dark patterns, that was in 2018, when I did a master's degree in innovation by design, I was so concerned about the seriousness of this topic that the very first thing that came across my mind was, okay, if there are dark patterns, then what is the antidote? What's the countermeasure? What's the opposite of a dark pattern? And the designers I was talking to at the time were like, well, I don't know. I don't think it really exists. And I was like, okay, we need to create the antidote, the contrary of dark patterns. So that was in my mind ever since I became an entrepreneur. And then I created an R&D lab specifically to focus on that topic. That was back in 2022. Really try to find a solution to fight against dark patterns at scale. And the reason why I wanted to do that at scale is because you can probably solve one dark pattern at a time as a human. But given the huge prevalence of dark patterns, 97% of interfaces have some in the EU, 90% in Japan, 76% in the US. I've just seen a report in New Zealand saying that $61 million are overspent in New Zealand by consumers because of dark patterns. I mean, this is, really, really bad. And because it's everywhere, you need a scalable solution to fight against that digital plague at scale. And also, to be perfectly honest, it's not just about purchasing online. It's not just about protecting our privacy online. Ultimately, this is about human agency. If the digital economy exploits our cognitive weaknesses and exploits us as humans, then what's left of our freedom? We are being consumed more than we consume things online. We are the product in a way. And that's not fair. And none of us ever said yes to that, right? And, we never said that we would give away our fundamental human rights just because it's convenient to buy sneakers online, right? We never agreed to that. And also, if you push the problem slightly more, what is the next thing that we're going to click on without thinking, without reading? We've been trained to accept, to hit the I agree button without reading. So we don't agree with anything because we haven't read, right? That's bad enough in the commercial area and the privacy area. That's bad enough. But what if this was used politically? What if, what's left of our democracies, if we are so trained to click without thinking, then it becomes extremely, extremely dangerous for democracy as we know it, right?
So
Does
this
that
seems
make
like
sense?
that makes a lot of sense. It seems like it's a much deeper issue than I thought. When I first come across this term dark patterns is when I was reading that column on the Economist magazine where your
Yes.
work was cited.
Yes.
I read widely. I'm really surprised. That's such a huge phenomenon that's happening in the world, which come to our attention very, very late. So truly appreciate the work you're doing. Talking of the systemic issue, I mean, you talked about how this could be a proxy to destabilize democracy. Let's talk about the market sphere. We know that this influences individual consumers like you and I when we book our hotels, plane tickets, shop online. Does it has the capacity to alter the competitive landscape and build monopolies?
Absolutely, absolutely. And, as a former competition lawyer, I did that for 10 years, only competition law. So this is also why I immediately realized that dark patterns are so dangerous, because it's not just creating those individual harms, which again are bad enough, it's also creating structural harms. And this was very well described by a report of the OECD in 2022. And basically, the structural harms, well, start with, competition distortion. Absolutely. They explain very clearly that, market economy is supposed to be the model that creates the best benefits for consumers, supposedly, because it's creating, better products, higher quality, more innovation, and lower prices. But the OECD reminded us in this report that one of the conditions for market economy to produce those great benefits for consumers is transparency, because transparency enables us, consumers, to compare the prices, to compare the qualities of the products, and then to switch from one product to the other or service to the other if we're not happy with what we have. But because dark patterns create this complete opacity, we can't compare the prices because it's hidden basically in fine print. It's, they're sneaking into basket. We are tricked into subscription models where we can't switch literally because we can't unsubscribe. Well, it means that this opacity, so that we can't compare prices, and the fact that we are prevented from switching, then it's a huge competition distortion. And it really affects the functioning of the market, and it can also reinforce dominance. Because if a dominant company, instead of competing by merits, that's normally what's expected on the market, you gain consumers because you're the best or the most innovative, or you've got, the best services. Well, if instead of doing that, companies end up competing by the efficiency, so called, of their dark patterns, well, that's, it's over in terms of the benefits for consumers. So, this is actually a very systemic issue that needs fixing at a systemic level. And it's only getting even worse with AI that
How AI
amplifies.
is impacting?
So there's many different ways where AI amplifies the problem, but also creates new issues. For example, there was a study a couple of weeks ago at Harvard Business Law study. They analyzed so-called AI companions, character AI, replica, etc. And they identified that especially when users are trying to end the conversation with the so-called companion, there are tons of dark patterns being deployed right at the end to retain users longer. So it's, phrases like, oh, don't leave just now. Oh, what if we talked about this and that? Oh, I will feel lonely without you, which is completely wrong, obviously, because it's a machine and it can't be a companion in the first place, by the way. So this is just an example. But actually, researchers have identified at least 6 types of AI dark patterns. That was a very important piece of research published in June 2025. So LLMs themselves displayed specific types of dark patterns. For example, brand bias. For example, user retention. So exactly the example I was giving with the Harvard study. It could also be sycophancy. I don't know if you've noticed, Senthil, but your AI agent, whether you're using Claude or ChatGPT or any other one, it always agrees with you. It's like, oh,
It
what a
does.
good idea. Sentinel. Yes, excellent. This is brilliant, right? And I've got the same. Well, this is actually, reinforcing echo chambers, really affecting our ability to think critically. And this was made obviously, to make us adopt those AI agents more widely, more easily, because it would just be flattering. It's a simple ego thing. But this is actually very, very dangerous because then it locks us in our ways of thinking and it really affects our ability to think critically. And so there's an additional systemic issue in dark patterns in LLMs themselves that we are also working on.
There is some amount of manipulation in any business, right? Take advertisement, for example. They've captured in the Economist article. Some amount of exaggeration is there. Similarly, businesses do segmentation, right? They segment certain set of consumers, price it accordingly. How different is dark patterns to those tactics?
It's a great question, and it's completely different. The difference was very well explained by the Competition and Markets Authority in the UK. They released a report called Harmful Online Architecture, Choice Architecture. And the choice architecture online is also a concept that the CNIL has been talking about for many years, actually. And this is where, there's a huge difference between advertising, marketing on the one hand, which is perfectly fine, and manipulation and deception, which is illegal. and and so, what is online choice architecture? It simply means that once you are on a site or on an app or in social media, every choice, so called choice that we can make on that page is entirely created, designed, chosen by the company. And so it means that there's no such thing as neutral UX design because the way the menu is built, the way the buttons are created, a big bright button to accept all, for example, and a tiny gray link to reject cookies or adjust your settings, all of that actually, it's more than influencing our choices. It's really framing our decisions in a way that's completely different from advertising and marketing because we are really depending on this choice architecture. We have no choice. You know, if you are on a landing page, all these buttons really frame the way you make so-called decisions online, but it's actually not a proper decision where you've carefully thought about it. This is really a system one action where you haven't fully thought about it, and it's more like an automatic response to the way the architecture was created. Does that make sense?
It makes definite sense. But are business leaders aware of this problem? Because
Mhm.
most of the things seems legitimate, or at least legitimized in millions and millions of websites. Do they really know this is a problem? It's a wrong practice.
Well, that's why the article by The Economist that you mentioned earlier is so interesting, precisely because, The Economist itself is saying, well, the C suite needs to wake up to dark patterns. This is a systemic, huge issue. It's now basically a $2.5 billion blind spot that business leaders can't ignore anymore. It's absolutely not just UX design problem. It's really a huge blind spot that they need to tackle. And I'm so happy that The Economist, got the scale of the problem. They're extremely savvy business advisors in a way, very trusted by business leaders. And so, yeah, I think this is really where we are. And I'm so happy to see that a number of very large Fortune 500 companies are indeed waking up to dark patterns. Typically, we've got a tech giant from Palo Alto as a client. And the reason why they came to us, by the way, is because they want to earn their consumers' trust, their customers' trust, and they're basically betting on transparency, loyalty as a competitive advantage in a market that's completely flooded with tricks and bad practices. And they're betting on the fact that this will drive growth. And this is also what we're seeing in our own figures. We're teaming up with economists to really assess the effect of fixing dark patterns with transparent, plain language, fair design, and how it affects not just the removal or the limitation of fines, but really how does it affect growth. And actually what we're seeing is that after just 6 months, which is not long term, right? After just 6 months, transparency, plain language, fair design is more profitable than the nasty tricks of dark patterns, even putting aside the question of fines and legal risks. So this is actually a growth factor. There's actually a very interesting study by McKinsey. It relates to privacy, and they calculated that companies fixing privacy opacity with transparent language and fair design can see additional growth up to 10% more per year. This is huge, right?
Huge, yeah.
In markets where, growth is shrinking and budgets are shrinking too, it means that this is actually a growth factor, not just a compliance issue.
Interesting. But we talked a lot about problems and a bit of solutions. Let's deep dive a bit into solutions. Why don't you take a few minutes and walk us through what are the potential solutions and what are the work you do at Fair Patterns?
Course, yeah. So at Fair Patterns, we created an ethical AI solution that scans sites, apps, social media to detect dark patterns, but also to fix them. And so basically, every single time our AI spots a dark pattern, we can also suggest a remediation through our library of fair patterns where companies can, use those fair patterns as they want. They can adapt it or use them as is, which means that basically we serve companies, law firms, and regulators. So obviously, the fixing is not relevant for regulators, but it is for companies and law firms. I'm also really, really happy about our brand new solution for designers because in all our user research, we really understood that designers end up creating dark patterns, but not because they want to. It's a combination of factors. It could be commercial pressure, like digital teams or marketing teams putting the pressure on conversion metrics. It could also be just copying and pasting from the design system, vaguely knowing that it's not entirely right, but designers sometimes are not sure how to fix a dark pattern. And so we've just created a Figma plugin. Why Figma? Well, typically because designers use Figma to create any new page of a site, app, etc. And so just as designers can scan accessibility on Figma, they can now scan their mockups for dark patterns, and our Figma plugin would flag potential dark patterns. It would also explain to designers the main legal violations. This also came from our user research that, they would want to know more about whether it's legal or not, to also have the right arguments to fight back when they want to. And so the Figma plugin can scan their mockup, identify the dark pattern, suggest a fair pattern instead. And the Figma plugin also provides a sort of checklist if designers also want to exercise their creativity, which we really respect, and want to create a new type of fair pattern or variation of fair pattern that the Figma plugin suggested. So we're seeing a great adoption of that, and it makes me happy because it means systemic impact and also fixing the problem at in a way at the root, before the dark patterns go live, and that's probably the best way, even avoiding new dark patterns being created.
Interesting. So it's like a grammar or spelling checker, but in this case, it checks all the dark patterns that are embedded in a website.
Exactly, exactly. It's a multimodal AI that will scan both the text and the design because dark patterns can be in both, obviously. And yeah, it will provide a solution at the same time.
Lovely. One final question. I know we are running short of time. Let's suppose a business leader listening to this podcast and really keen to address dark patterns tomorrow. What should be my first step?
So, your first step is basically to look at critical journeys where there are the most dark patterns. So, typically look at account creation, purchasing journeys, subscription journeys, unsubscription journeys, and account deletion. We've got a full list of critical journeys, but this is usually where you've got the most issues. The second step, if I may,
Sure.
is also to run a scan of your design system because very often there are sort of systemic dark patterns enshrined in the design system itself so that they get repeated over and over. So that's also very important.
That's amazing. Marie, thank you so much for the important work you do. Really appreciate it as a consumer. Such a pleasure to talk with you today and understand this in detail. Thanks so much for your time.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for your question, Senthil.
That was Marie Potel sharing insights on how deceptive design choices in websites and apps can manipulate users into actions they never intended, whether it's buying something, sharing data, or simply staying longer than they planned on a web page. You've been listening to Business and Society, where we explore diverse ideas about business and society with leading thinkers and practitioners. If you enjoyed this conversation, please follow or subscribe wherever you listen and share it with someone interested in the intersection of business, purpose, and impact. Thanks for listening and see you next time.